I think I've got, yeah.
I'm just going to leave it right here.
Okay.
And there's your remote right there.
Thank you, sir. All right. You totally freaked me out when you had that slide up that said it's about play. And I was like, oh, damn. Now I got to change all my slides. All right, let me get myself oriented here. Clicker? Check. So when Mark asked me to talk about bravery, I was intrigued, but I was also mildly insecure because, you know, if you're talking about something, it implies that you have done sufficient acts of bravery, and I just wasn't sure I qualified. You know, it's not like I've been called upon to defeat Hitler or anything. You know, it's challenging. You know, my grandfather was, and we totally kicked his ass, by the way. But it's more difficult to know who the villains are these days. And so I think it's more difficult in some ways to be brave. And so I started thinking about, you know, what have I done that would be considered brave? And I think that one of the elements of bravery is that it requires a level of kind of daring and some notion that you're going against conventional wisdom. And I think that's really key. And I think part of the problem with not going along with the crowd and taking the road less traveled is that there's a kind of reaction, a social reaction that's invoked by that. And it goes kind of like this. This is sort of what happens if you take the unconventional path and you do something different. And this is the traditional, I think, reaction. So you come up with some kind of idea, you know, and you think, wow, this is amazing, this is new, novel, no one's ever done this before. And your peers or the people around you, their reaction is generally that you're just sort of weird, right? And then you proceed because you're brave and fearless and you've come up with something new. So you begin your task and they assume that you're going to fail. And then typically, and I'm from the startup world. Like Mark said, I've been doing it for many, many years, almost 2 decades, mostly in the internet space. And used to run Grow Lab, and I know all the numbers and I know what the odds of success are. And typically you fail. You know, 9 times out of 10 you fail. And so people think, duh, of course you're going to fail. We were right. You did something unusual. And then typically you fail again, and then they just ignore you. So this is the sort of typical path of bravery. Once in a while, you actually get it right, and you win. And so this is what happens if you win. You have the eureka moment. Same reaction, people consider you odd. You begin, people have the same reaction, they assume you're going to fail. And then you have some glimmer of proof, some small piece of evidence that you're actually doing the right thing, and you kind of prove your point, like, people do like this idea. And then people are afraid of you. And then you succeed, and they hate you. So that is the path of bravery. That's sort of what it looks like. So bravery, just novelty, just doing something different, often has a cost. So what other attributes goes into making something a brave act? I think, you know, one of the things that is important is that it's really easy to take risks, but bravery cannot be an unconscious or subconscious act. You need to be kind of conscious of what the risks are. And I think that's what makes the difference between something that's brave and something that's just foolhardy or oblivious or reckless or crazy. Crazy and brave are 2 totally different things. But it's difficult to kind of make those assessments. It's difficult to know enough about the world. You know, you think about, well, how do you measure risk? How do you understand risk? How do you figure out if what you're doing is brave or if you're just like taking the easy way out? How do you know if you're not just being a chicken? How do you know if you're not, being motivated by your own emotions? There's this is a difficult question to answer. There are large pools of money, hedge funds, that spend billions of dollars trying to understand risk and assess whether or not this is risky or bold or brave. So it's very, very, very difficult. But I think part of being brave is not hedging, that it's committing. It's taking a certain course of action and saying, damn it, I'm just going to do this. I'm not 100% sure. My best intuition tells me this is the right thing to do, but I'm going to do it anyway. It's a little bit like the karate chop, right? Like if you go into a karate chop thinking, I don't know if I'm going to break through the board, you're not going to do it. You need to envision your hand on the other side of the follow-through. You need to imagine that you've already succeeded in doing it. I think the other thing about bravery is that it always involves a crisis. You're confronting something, you're going up against something, you're trying to solve a problem. And those can be big problems. They can be small problems. It can be a design problem, so you need a bold solution. It can be an identity crisis. You need to change your life. You need to do something completely different. It can be an economic crisis. It can be an environmental crisis. But these are the things that require bravery. There's always a problem. It could be a sinkhole. And so I started thinking about, well, what's the kind of bravest, craziest, most amazing thing I've ever witnessed? And this seems a little bit corny, but one of the most amazing acts of bravery I've ever seen, and if you haven't seen it before, it's incredible, is the speech that Martin Luther King gave. And this speech was the one he gave the day before he was assassinated. And it's worth listening to. What button do I press here? The other space bar? Is it? Okay. It's pretty good, eh?
All we say to America is be true to what you said on paper. If I lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand some of these illegal injunctions. Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they haven't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right. And so just as I say we aren't going to let any dogs or water hoses turn us around, we aren't going to let any injunction turn us around. Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
And to think that that was essentially his famous last words. Those are the last words he said in public. He's a pretty amazing guy. Another person that tops my list of super brave dudes is Ai Weiwei. He is a contemporary Chinese artist, architect, photographer, cultural critic, and he has taken on probably the most powerful government in the world. He is a critical opponent of the Chinese government. He was the artistic consultant for the Beijing National Stadium during the Olympics, so he has been recognized within China as a legitimate artist who supports the state. But as an activist, he has taken on the Chinese government on the topic of democracy and civil rights, and this is an incredibly dangerous, this might be the most dangerous job in the world. And I think that it's really interesting to look at these kind of high-stakes, dramatic standoffs between people who are confronting oppression, because I think it does two things. It shows you the effectiveness of courageous behavior, and it also, I think, can highlight the kind of tactics that work, the effective tactics that work. And I think in product development, which is kind of what I do, we have this concept of the minimum viable product. And so with the minimum viable product, there's two competing notions, right? There's the idea that you need to build just the minimum. If you build more than that, it's more expensive. The cognitive load on customers is higher because they are seeing new things for the first time and they have to ingest and understand all of these things. The cost of maintaining those products as time goes on is higher because you've built more and you need to support it. It's just much more expensive. And in a highly competitive world, you can't do more than what is required. So that's the minimum piece of minimum viable product. The other piece is viable, right? So you need to build something that has actual utility that people will use, that's sufficient. And I think there's a corollary between that and bravery. I think what Ai Weiwei is practicing is maximum viable defiance. And so he's operating within the confines of acceptable behavior, but he's challenging it at every moment in the most effective way that he can. And so here's some amazing examples. This photograph was something that he put out, and the nice thing about the Chinese language is that you can have double meanings with characters. And so he is standing nude in front of you with just an alpaca covering his body. And on the alpaca is written grass, mud, horse. And so that means one thing, but it actually also means fuck your mother, the party central committee. And so he's out there, he's putting this art out, which is amazing, he's incredible, he's an incredible artist, but it has this double meaning that is, again, within the bounds of kind of acceptable behavior, but he's making a statement, and he's saying, you can defy authority, you just have to do it tastefully. He's also got a show called Uncooperative Attitude, but again, the specific translation is fuck off. And he's been an amazing advocate for democracy in China. The authorities don't always appreciate this. They've arrested him many times, and whenever they do, he documents it. He puts it up on Twitter and Facebook. So here's a photograph of him actually being arrested. This has happened many times. And the Chinese government, again, has this sort of like strange relationship with him where they want to support him, and he's an artist, and they need to have culture within the society, and yet he's a constant opponent to what they're doing. So this was a studio that he built in Shanghai, and once they decided they didn't like him very much, they ordered him to demolish it. They said, you don't have the proper permits. And so, again, in the spirit of maximum viable defiance, he didn't just go along with it, he didn't have a protest, he didn't do something that was sort of conventional and predictable. He had a party. He had a demolition party. And in the demolition party, he invited all of his supporters. And this is an important detail here. because I don't speak Chinese, I have to actually read the notes here. Yes, there it is, river crab. So his supporters came, they gathered in their hundreds, and they ate river crab. And river crab means harmony. So it's got this double meaning, means harmony. And so he invited all of his supporters, they had a party, they had a great time, and they devoured river crab. And so again, he was making the statement within the context of allowing the Chinese government to demolish his space, but doing so in a way that communicated his dissent. And the interesting thing about Ai Weiwei, one of the many interesting things about Ai Weiwei, is that when he spent time in the States, he became one of the world's best blackjack players. So he'd go down to Atlantic City, and so here's a man who understands risk. He's a man who understands how you can play the odds, and he does that with perfection. So, like I said earlier, I think the challenge for us in this day and age is that, it's easy if there's a well-known villain in the world to confront that villain and fight bravely against them. But I think the challenge today is it's really hard to know what it is to be brave. What's the crisis? How do you respond? What's the proper reaction? And I think one of the key things is that the easiest way to exhibit sort of cowardice or not be brave is to refuse to see something and to be willfully blind about what that crisis is. It's just the easiest way. And I think there are two things that I think are massive problems. One is the environmental decay that we're confronting. And as I came in today, by the way, I noticed that there's a big copyright sign on this photograph, and I just want to say that it's wrong to steal images from Google. So just a little public service announcement there. We don't have trees like this anymore. We've cut them all down, and they look like this. And this is a real problem, but it requires courage, I think, at the outset to recognize that this is an issue. Our oceans are becoming polluted. These are things that require bravery to confront. It's very difficult. It's actually the most terrifying thing in the world to imagine that our natural environment is not going to support us. That is something that requires bravery in itself. Another thing that really scares me is all of the surveillance and the erosion of privacy we have. We live in a world now where the Canadian Prime Minister is spying on Brazilian mining industry and taking that information and passing it on to Canadian mining companies, where the Obama administration is spying on the Germans, where Canadian governments and American governments are spying on Canadian citizens. There was even this presentation, I don't know if you saw this, this was published in Der Spiegel, which is a German newspaper, and this is from the NSA, and they were kind of mocking the American public and saying, I don't know if you get the reference here, but this commercial was the commercial that Apple aired to talk people out of using PCs. And so they had this kind of dystopian world of Big Brother, and it was very Orwellian, and they had all these kind of drones, and then this person ran in and kind of liberated them, and it was all about, get a Mac and don't be a zombie. And the NSA actually referenced this slide in presenting a scenario internally that said, who knew that in 1984 that this would be Big Brother and the zombies would be paying customers? This is an NSA slideshow. This is like, a board meeting that they're having, talking about how we're such suckers. So this is one of those totally insidious things. It's really hard to spot surveillance. It's really hard to sort of see it. It's really hard to grapple with the fact that this is happening. Just 2 days ago, there was another revelation that the NSA is actually intercepting information that's going into your Gmail account and to all of your Google accounts. And the Google legal team was outraged. They actually said, this was a quote from them, "We are outraged at the lengths to which government seems to have gone to intercept data from our private fiber networks, and it underscores the need for urgent reform." Like, this is the legal guy from Google saying this. So this is a real problem. And I think it's our job to respond. What really worries me is that these two dystopic worlds could collide, and we have a world where we don't have enough stuff, and as the fight for that kind of scarcity evolves, that we'll have some ecological apartheid that emerges, and the somewhat benevolent digital oversight that we've had to date becomes more insidious. And so I think we need to respond, and I think we need to respond now. So what does that mean? How does bravery fit into this? Well, I think, in summary, I would say, I think that bravery is responding to a crisis in an original way, in the way that Ai Weiwei does, while being cognizant of the dangers. Those are the three elements. And this is kind of what we do, right? We're creative people. This is kind of our job description, right? You're solving a problem in an original way while knowing what the parameters are. And I think that we need to be aware of what the opportunities are, because this is where I think it gets exciting. We live in a world now that is unrecognizable from the world even 2 years ago. 90% of the world's data was created in the last 24 months. So you take the entire history of the world, from cavemen forward, 90% of the world's data was created in the last 24 months. What that means is that we now know 10 times more about the world than we did in November of 2011. That's amazing. That's an astonishing fact. And this, I think, is the big opportunity. I think the fact that we have this resource, all of this information out there, that's growing in a way that is overwhelming us, but represents knowledge about our world, an understanding of how we all interact, that can be used to build a smarter world that is not an ecological nightmare. This is the opportunity we have. And as creative people who are working in the digital sphere, who understand technology, this is a major, major opportunity. So, we know more than ever. We're smarter than we've ever been. We have no excuse. We just need to be brave. The end.
We're going to do a totally wide open, ask anything you want Q&A with Mike. As is my wont, I'm going to start off with a question for him. When you settle in. Mike,
Yes.
you talk, it's easy to talk about bravery, isn't it?
Simple.
Yep. It's not easy to do the right thing, though, is it? No. The answer is no. Have you ever been faced with a dilemma or a decision in your personal or career life that you knew that you made the right choice for the right reasons and it totally backfired, or vice versa? You made a decision that in hindsight was the wrong, for the wrong reasons, and it actually worked out fantastic? Like, how does that relate to your perspective of bravery?
Whoa, that's a multi-part question that requires encyclopedic knowledge of my own psychology that I'm not sure I have available right now. But yeah, doing the right thing for the wrong reasons and the wrong thing for the right reasons. I think most actions actually are subconscious. I think if you think about all of the significant events in your life, many of those events have arisen because you were doing things for other reasons. Like the people you meet in your lives, the people you end up, getting married to, or having kids with, or becoming friends with, or enemies with, or whatever the relationship is, the things that really kind of define who you are. You often find yourself there for reasons that are completely arbitrary. And I think that there's, I always try to be aware of I think the way people operate in the world is they don't make active conscious decisions so much as they sort of set the context for their own existence, and so it's kind of like if you go looking for trouble, you'll find it, you know what I mean? And you don't know exactly what trouble looks like, but you're looking for it. Or you want some kind of, positive experience, you're not sure what it is, but you're sort of like, you set the context for that. And so I think most of my decisions have been based on just kind of setting parameters for what is, acceptable, and then the details sort of fall into place. I mean, I think, like the Vegas story was kind of, that's an example of winding up somewhere without really having that intention. So my wife and I were going to elope, and we had this whole big elaborate plan. We were going to go to Africa and spend a whole bunch of time there, and then we couldn't get the time off work. So we're like, well, what do we got? We've saved up some money. We've got a week. Where are we going to go? So we were like, let's go to Vegas. And we're like, oh yeah, we were going to get married. So, pick up the phone, call Little White Chapel. They have the service where they'll meet you anywhere in the desert. And so we drove out to this bizarre space with all these kind of like red craggy rocks, and preacher met us there, and he got out of his little Suzuki Sidekick with the photographer / witness, and we were, standing there, and we did the vows, and as we said, I do, these two guys came out on these BMX dirt bikes, like over the hill, and it was really quite kind of dramatic. But that's typical, right? I mean, you just sort of find yourself like, holy shit, I'm getting married in the Nevada desert, and now when I tell the story, everyone's like, oh yeah, that old cliche, right? You eloped in Vegas, but that was never the intention, really. So that's a decision I was happy about.
Cool. Who has questions?
Hey, Mike. I'm wondering if you could name some lesser-known people or groups, especially in the Vancouver startup scene, that are doing brave things, and you want to see get more recognition.
I think. I think all entrepreneurs are really, really ballsy. You kind of have to be, because it's a crazy thing to do. The chances of your success are almost nil, and they really are. Like if you think about the way you progress through financing, for instance, you start off as a startup with 2 or 3 people, you get some angel investment perhaps, and then if you totally, kick ass, then you maybe can talk to some VCs, and the VCs will put money into you, and this is where they'll give you like maybe $1 million or something, right? It's kind of that level of financing. And even at that level, a VC knows that 9 out of 10 of those startups are going to fail. That's just the math, right? So they put money into 10 companies, and if one has a 10 times return, they break even. That's their math. So they know the odds of failure at the VC level is 9 out of 10. So if you're not even at that level, if you're kind of just pulling something together and you got some friends and family money, your odds of succeeding are probably 1 in 100. And those people are the people who are going to help us climb out of this clusterfuck that we're in right now. And so those people, whoever they are, in whatever basements or accelerators, the companies down at Grow Lab or Launch Academy, all these various accelerators all over the city, those are the heroes who are probably in most cases sacrificing their own well-being, health, and relationships in order to advance a better society. So I just tip my hat to all those people. And if you want to be one of those people, my advice is to do it when you're 27 and you have nothing to lose, because that gets harder and harder to do as you get older. Because the impact of making those kind of rash, crazy decisions doesn't just affect you at that point. It affects the other people in your relationships and families. So those are the companies I support. Go to the demo days for accelerators and look at these early stage companies and recognize that even though these people sound like they might be crazy, that they deserve your support. I rarely turn down an invitation to talk to someone who's starting up a company, even if I think they're crazy. And sometimes I'll tell them that. Sometimes I'll tell them, you're crazy, you shouldn't do this. And they never listen.
Who else had their hand up? Okay, up front.
Oh, thanks. So you talked a lot about the failure and the cost of bravery, and I wondered if you could speak anecdotally from your own experience about something that cost you deeply or deeply affected maybe your relationships or a time when you failed and it cost you? Or you succeeded and it cost you anyway?
Well, it's funny. So I don't know if I don't know if you know the story of Now Public, but so Now Public was the citizen journalism network that we started. I hacked together some goofy prototype back in 2003, and it was a way of letting people upload their own photographs and tell their own news stories from their perspective. And one of the motivations for doing that was I was kind of pissed off at just how bad the news was and how I felt like it had become corrupted and that it was advancing an agenda that I didn't necessarily agree with. It was right after the Iraq War had started, and I thought that organizations like the New York Times had really let us down. And I thought, here's an amazing opportunity to take all of this disruptive new technology, and this was when camera phones and Wi-Fi were first starting to emerge. I mean, imagine a world pre-camera phone. That was that world. And so we built up this network, and we ended up raising a whole bunch of money, and we built it into what was at its peak the largest citizen journalism network in the world. We had like 300,000 people sending us stuff. And so it was a big success from that perspective. And my goal was always to kind of advance or empower people who were marginalized from the grand narrative. And when you take investor money, you kind of lose control over the agenda to some degree. And so when 2009 came around, our investors started saying, well, who do we have in our portfolio who could provide us with some kind of financial return? And we were successful at that time, so they really encouraged us to sell. And I didn't want to sell. I mean, we had 4 years of money in the bank, and I think we could have made the service even more interesting. But at that point, it's not my decision. As the founder, you can kind of kibosh the whole thing and say, "Fuck you, I'm leaving," and that's about the only leverage you have at that point. And I didn't want to do that. And so we ended up selling it to a company that is a media company that has a right of center agenda. And I was like, damn. And so you have to, it's really hard to kind of like instill the requirements or the constraints in the early stage of a company that will then carry through and be realized when you exit. And so that's something I think if I did that again, and I don't think I will, I would really try to lock in some kind of ethical mandate or some constraint that would provide would limit the exit options, but would ensure that whatever life that thing took on in its future self would be what I anticipated.
Would you do another startup yourself? You're not 27 anymore.
Roughly 27. I'm semi-young. Yeah, I mean, I will. It's just like heroin or something. It's a total addiction. It really is. It's so much fun. I've come across as a bit gloomy about all this risk taking, but it's great. I mean, you get invited to Kazakhstan. You get to do all these crazy things because people see you as a maverick and as a pioneer, and that in itself is just great. You get opportunities that you'd never have elsewhere, and you can make. It's a great way to make money. You never have a boss. I mean, I have a boss now. Holy shit! Had no idea it would be like this.
Yeah, but isn't it Ryan Holmes?
Yeah, he's great. Great. It's a great company, and I really think Hootsuite is an excellent company. You should all use their services. But it's weird having a boss. It's like. The way I've described it is, it's kind of like I've been like a wild animal in the jungle all my life, and now I'm in the zoo. And so I don't have to worry about getting eaten by lions, but I've got to deal with the zookeeper. And it's just different, And so at some point I'll probably jump over the fence and get eaten by a lion.
A lion with a bunch of owls over at Hootsuite.
Hey, thanks. I was a bit surprised there was something I thought missing from your statement about the entrepreneur, which is about persistence. I imagined that there was going to be a code after saying, and don't give up.
Yeah.
Is there a time to give up, or do you have to go in saying, I will never give up, otherwise you're destined to fail?
Yeah. It's a great question. I mean, years ago, I did the New York City Marathon, which is like great. You guys should all do it. And I remember there was you know, you get to close to the finish line. You're like 2 or 3 miles away, and of course everyone's like, "Keep going, do it. You can do it." You know, but there are people who shouldn't. Like there are people who, you know, could harm themselves if they keep going, right? And that's a real knack, is to understand, like, at what point is this a failure, right? The whole mantra with early stage startups is fail fast, right? And that is in contradiction with this idea of being persistent. So I think you need to understand, like, how to fail well. You know, we were actually, last time I was here, we were talking about play and the idea of failure, and there was a school teacher in our group when we did our little kind of chat sessions, and I was kind of joking about, you know, how do you get an A+ in failure? It just doesn't make sense, right? And so it got me thinking about how you fail well. And I think failure, you need to be very careful about how you define success, right? So you can fail at a small thing, but keep the overall enterprise continuing. And when you build a business is a thesis, right? A business is a theory. Hey, I think if we hand out all these cell phones that people are going to take pictures and send them into the central server and we'll organize it and we'll have this new service. That's a theory, right? So there's a bazillion assumptions in that theory. One is that people care, right? People are going to get involved. The other is that the technology is going to work and the camera phones are going to be simple enough and people are going to upload the stuff. The other is that advertisers will then pay for that service or pay for that content and that audience. So there's a bazillion little tiny theories in an overarching theory. And I think that you want to be persistent in your defense of your overarching theory, and then you want to succeed or fail in those tiny little things and know what you're trying to succeed and fail at. I mean, I think, like the thing I've always been fascinated with is this. I have this weird notion that you can kind of like understand what's happening on the ground at this moment in time. That's what I've been trying to do for 20 years, is try to understand what's happening at this moment in time in a particular place. Now, if I think about my work history, Now Public was an attempt to do that. You know, like what's happening in Sri Lanka right now? You know, send us your photograph. The news business is kind of like that. And at Hootsuite, the products we're developing now, we have like ways of like listening to tweets in certain areas. And I feel like that's kind of like my thing. I'm really interested in seeing the world and gaining an understanding of what's happening at a particular place at a particular time, which is kind of like a goofy little fetish that I've had for 20 years. But, and I've failed and succeeded at various times in trying to deliver that vision, but I've always had that idea.
In the back here.
Hi there, my name's Godfrey, and the first part is, I was wondering if you've read Malcolm Gladwell's new book, David and Goliath?
No, I haven't. I've heard a lot about it though. Is there a follow-up?
Yeah, it's a great book, and it intersects a lot with what you've talked about today. The question I have is, when you're Goliath, like if you're a big company like say Google or Hootsuite's getting pretty big, what does it mean to be brave when you're the Goliath?
I think you have a higher ethical standard. I think most people commit kind of ethical lapses because they have no choice. They hold up a convenience store because they have no money. They break into your car because they need to get food. And so I think that it's sometimes more difficult to be ethical if you're small or disempowered. But I think if you're big, if you're powerful, your job is to raise the bar. Your job is to be better than the average. Your job is to take a stand and kind of bring people along with you. So I think, the bigger you are, the better you should be. You have that obligation. And that's hard to do, right? I mean, Google's got shareholders. They've got people they are accountable to, and it's easy to sort of bend. Google's an interesting company because it's essentially a private company, right? The two founders control most of the voting shares. So they actually, that's why they are such a great company, is because they are not beholden to anyone.
One more question, and then we're going to have to break. Who has a killer question? On a scale of 1 to 10, how killer is it? 11. 11?
Whoa. Hard to beat that.
That was a, yeah.
Well, you are talking about bravery, so 11 is hopefully brave enough. Firstly, I'm 27 and I started my own company, so we should talk, I think.
Cool, happy to, yeah.
And
Keep going.
my question actually revolves around something I read recently by a product manager at Facebook who touches on the subject of data that you touched on at the end of your keynote. And she was saying that you should use data to perfect your product and not define your product. And so my question is, how do you get the balance between kind of like the intuition through bravery and looking at the data and making sensible decisions according to the data on the product development side?
Yeah. So there's a kind of like a technical answer to that question, and then there's a more philosophical point, which is I actually think there's a big opportunity in thinking about data as an opportunity to build product. Data, because data is a function of some kind of transaction or interaction or activity, and we are now at a point in our evolution as a species where we have all of this information about how we all operate, and so we can use that information to reconfigure the world. And I mean, this sounds abstract, but if you think about like Airbnb or something, right, or Uber, or all of these kind of sharing economy companies that are essentially reconfiguring the whole notion of how we own and share stuff just based on data, right? It's like we know where you are, and here's your location, and here's your social network, and here's how you pay for it. All that stuff is just empowered by data. And so data actually does allow for this whole new universe of products and services to open up. And I think that's where we need, as creative people, we need to take our thinking. So that's the philosophical point. In terms of intuition versus metrics, I've been in this business for 20 years, and a promise is always that, we can see everything. You have this kind of visibility into all activity, and you can monitor what people do on your website and how often they come back and everything. And it's really easy to be seduced by the idea that you have total visibility into what people do. And the reality is you never do. The data is always contradictory or incomplete, or it's indicative of something, but it's rarely conclusive. And I find in my own experience that you can use data to kind of get you to a certain point, but at some point you're like, what does your gut tell you? So data is really important. Measure everything you can, but recognize that that has a limit, and at some point you're just going to have to do a gut check and say, you know what? I think this is what people are doing, or this is why people are doing things. Because it's hard to get into people's heads with data and understand their motivation. Not impossible, but you just need to think about the perspective from the human perspective. You need to try to understand and empathize with the end user, and that's not a data-driven thing.
Alan Greenspan, who controlled the economy in the States for years and years and years, has a new book out right now. I forget what it's called. Where he the
roadmap, I think.
Yeah, and he as much as admits now that he was convinced, he and his colleagues were convinced they understood how the data and the Keynesian economic models worked and how the market would work and how it could not fail. It could not fail. Mm-hmm. And then at 2008, he had to change his entire view of the world and what he calls animal spirits, like the idea of groupthink, that there can be this tip where an entire wave of action happens because people all panic or follow each other or whatever. I mean, these things are all right. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
We're out of time. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Please give him a round of applause. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Absolutely. This is just a hard for us to say thank you. Appreciate it. Great.